video, I'm going to look at acrylic paints and oil paints and their mediums. In this section, I want to talk to you about setting up a palette for acrylic painting. You can buy stay wet palettes that have a kind of foam and a paper on top. You can make your own stay wet palette. So this is a piece of dishcloth. I could have used paper towel, and it's really straightforward. You just soak that, spray it or soak it with water. So you're making a damp surface. And then tracing paper. You could probably use baking parchment. I don't know, I haven't tried it. I use tracing paper, okay, which is going to slightly absorb the water, but not be wet. So then when you squeeze out your tubes, it's going to extend your drying time. You don't want it so wet that you're watering down your paint, obviously. And as you can see, we're getting a bit of a curl where that paper is getting damp, but that's easily resolved. A little bit of masking tape. Okay, and that's going to mean that you're not going to have your paints drying quite so quickly. And then if you have got some paint left over at the end of the day, either do as I do. I tend to just wipe it on a panel and it's starting off a layer. Or if you're wanting to go back to it, then you can cover that with cling film. Some people do this system, but use kind of Tupperware tubs or ice cream tubs with lids, and they will work on the lid and then the tub goes on top. Okay, so flipping it over. You'll find a way of doing it, but basically you just need a slightly damp, not super damp, it's a slightly damp surface to squeeze your tubes and your paints onto. That's going to make them last a little bit longer. In this short video, I want to talk to you a little bit more about paint and the differences between them and what you can get hold of and why they're different. All of the things you see in front of you here are acrylic based. We've been looking at acrylic pastes, gels and mediums, and they're all compatible with each other. Okay, I'm just going to move these over to one side because actually what I want to look at first are these beasts. All right, these are all acrylic pastes of different makes. Okay, and there are plenty of them. Okay, plenty of different brands out there. Some of them are better quality than others. And when I say quality, it's usually not the polymers that makes a difference. It will be the quality of the pigment. So your cheaper ones will have probably more chalky pigments and other things in it to bulk it out, whereas the expensive ones are going to have expensive true pigments with polymers. So that's pretty much the difference. These are just a few I have lying around in my studio for all sorts of different reasons. These are System 3. This is a good mid-range brand. I used to use this brand when I was teaching in colleges. It's fine. I bought this one because I went on a course with Lewis Noble and he uses this particular delicious avocado green. So that's what that one is. That's another System 3. Okay, so they come in different packages, but that's the same. They're made by Dale Rowney. This is a sea white one. This is probably only available in the UK, Sea Acryl. I've got a lot of this. They were selling off this copper, and I particularly liked it as an underpainting, that when I scratched through with my paintings, you can see the copper glimpsing through. But that's a cheaper version of this, but it's fine. It does what I need it to do. Then we've got Golden, okay, which really is one of the top brands, along with Liquitex. And Lascaux. Okay, so there probably are other brands. This is what I've got in my studio. So these guys are going to be top of the range stuff on the whole. And you know, all the companies will make their own brands. So Jackson's make their own acrylics, etc., etc. This is, as I said before, this is what I've got. So these guys are probably your top range, and they have better pigments in them on the whole than the cheaper ones. This one, I particularly like these. These are quite cheap. These are by Cinelia, and they're in these pouches. But it's a nice paint. The only thing I will say, it didn't happen with this one, is I took these off on a painting trip with some tubes of paint, and the corner, clearly the corner of one of the tubes pierced the pouch, and it went everywhere. Okay, but these are nice. Some people who have arthritic hands find it easier to squeeze these out than forcing their hands through a tube. So they're nice to work with. Okay, so all of these are intermixable with each other. They will have different consistencies. So for example, if I grab my palette, I'll show you what I mean. So this is a nice, this is quite a, you can see how that's gone to a peak. Okay, so that's what I said before in the first one, I think it was the first one of the smashing surfaces. A tube of this kind of paint, okay, is predominantly, half of it is going to be pigment load and a few other things, and the other half is going to be a regular gel. Okay, and that's the kind of effect you're getting. That's a regular gel consistency. But they're not all that thick. Some of them are thicker than others. I would say certainly in terms of thickness, the golden is about on a par with the System 3. Okay, so if you're looking for that kind of consistency or viscosity, they're pretty much similar. Okay, and others are softer. You won't get any harder than this. You won't get any stiffer than that. That's as stiff as they go unless you add things to it. But in terms of straight out of the tube, some of them are much softer. So the Liquitex, this is called a soft body, and it particularly is that you can see that would run if I held it, and off it goes. Okay, so that's quite soft for something that's in a tube. It's described as soft body, so that's what you kind of expect. And the Lascaux is pretty similar. Look, it's settling down. Okay, so I don't know if hopefully you can see. I'll do a close-up photo where the golden and the System 3 have they're holding up the marks at the texture, and if I let that dry, that's how they would dry. These are leveling off. They're softer. Okay, so it's worth bearing in mind. And the Abstract, by the very nature of the Cinelia. Oh, actually, this one's gone a bit harder. Oh no, it's me. Obviously, that's a hard bit. Lovely. Look, that's softer. Okay. Okay, that's softer. Not as soft as I thought it was going to be. Okay, that gives you some idea. And then, of course, the cheaper ones. There's loads of cheap ones out there, and they're intermixable, so that's okay. And that's all right. That does what I need it to do, which is that I don't use it to mix. I use it as a ground. Okay, so that's kind of what your tube paints are. These are all mixable, intermixable, but you know, all the brands, I can mix these together. You can mix cheaper ones with more expensive ones. That's fine. The only other thing I will say about this is they all have, certainly the expensive ones, less so with the cheap ones, but certainly the expensive ones, you're going to get some transparency. And those of you who know me and know how I like to work, I do like to work with a range of transparent and opaque paints, and the transparency is going to be down to the pigment, purely the pigment. Okay, so for example, this is it's called transparent. This is transparent brown iron oxide. The golden tubes are made with 3 black bars, so it's a black and white printed metal tube with 3 black bars, and they're painted on the top. So if you can see the 3 black bars, you know that's a transparent paint. Okay, that's pretty much how it works. Compared to, for example, it's a different type of paint, but it's the same thing. The same bars on here, you can't see them. The burnt umber in the golden range is not transparent. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. But all the brands will have some kind of symbol as to whether they're transparent or not. And it's usually on the back, says she. Trying to find it. Though it says translucent. Okay, so it actually says it rather than a symbol. Often there's a symbol, it's a circle or a square, and it's full or not, or chopped in half, and it's going to give you some idea of the transparency. Okay, yeah, can't find it. I'm sure there are here. Okay, there's a little tiny square on the Liquitex, a solid square, which means this is This is an opaque colour. Okay, that's not a transparent colour. If that was an empty square or a crossed in half square, that's going to be a semi-transparent or transparent. On their websites, on their paint charts, it will say quite clearly if they're transparent or not. So it's worth having a few transparents in your collection of paints, certainly when it comes down to things like glazing. Now, the other tube paint I've got down here are these ones. And this is a range by Golden called Golden Open. And so I've squeezed some of the transparent brown out there. It's a very similar colour. This is the burnt umber, and it has the same texture to it. Now I'm doing this on Sunday afternoon. And the time is 12:30. I reckon in about an hour and a half, that would be dry. That's not going to be dry until Tuesday. So much, much, much longer drying time. I use the Golden Open for my monotype printing, because you can roll it out on a jelly plate and it's going to stay there. It's not going to dry before you got hold of your paper. Portrait artists particularly like it because it gives you time to blend. Plein air artists like it for similar reasons. And I like it because actually you can do what I call a rub-in glaze with it without it drying. Now you can buy retarders, okay, that are going to slow down the drying time of any of these. But the joy of the Open is it's all in the tube. You haven't got to start mixing and get different blends and mixes. And most retarders tend to be quite runny, whereas as you can see, this is holding its peak. So that's what the Golden Open. Open is actually a printmaking term. When we say that an ink is open, it means it isn't drying. Okay, so it's a slow drying acrylic identified by the colour of the tube. Okay. So they're worth, again, 1 or 2 of those can be really handy. And if I mix these two together, I'm going to increase, I've got paint all over there, I'm going to increase the drying time of this one by mixing it with that one. Okay, so they're intermixable. Okay, so they're what we call heavy stroke soft bodies. All right, so tube paints are pretty much those. I'm then going to move on to fluids. I'm not aware, or someone I'm sure is going to correct me, that there's anyone else other than Golden who make a fluid. Oh, I don't know. So please do, please do. So a fluid, as you can hear, okay, is literally a fluid paint. And it's runny. So if I dribble that down there, I'm sticking to my board. It's going, okay. It's running. It's extremely viscous. It has polymers in it that will dry as it is, but it doesn't have the gel in it. That's the difference, okay. A much, much higher pigment load than a tube paint, because basically, in a kind of rough way, this is 30 mil. A tube is 60 mil. One way of just getting in your head, I'm sure it's not a pure mathematical thing, is a tube is half gunk, half regular gel, and half of the kind of thing that's in your fluid paint. Okay, so they're very highly pigmented. So even though when you go in the shop, you might balk at the price of them, you're actually getting more for your money if you buy these and a tub of the soft gel and make your own. So it's not as convenient, obviously, but you can make your own tube consistency and save mega bucks from buying the tubes. Okay, I use these in a lot of workshops I do, and tubes are great for going out, plein air painting, you know, throw them in your bag, you're good to go, fantastic. In my studio, I mostly use the fluids, and I get them in bigger bottles. Because I want to choose the viscosity. I want to know that I can make that runny by adding something thinner. I can go even thinner than I've got here. If I add it to, for example, if I add it to some GAC 100, So she not being able to get that out there. Here we go. Which is, look, that's even runnier than the fluid. So I can add this to this, and I'm getting a really, you know, we're really, really, really runny paint that is still has very high polymers. Okay, so it's still going to be super sticky. Now you can water down any of these to make them runnier. Of course you can, but you might, if you're not careful, you can run into problems of adhesion. All right, so you know, if I added a lot of water to this, you can make any acrylic into a watercolor paint. Okay, more than happy to do that. But if you put that on a non-absorbent surface, like putting it on a heavy gel or a soft gel or onto a canvas that's just got gesso on it, for example, you are what we call compromising. I've split it by adding that much water to it. Okay, I've split all those glues up. They're not going to hold on to each other, the polymers. So you're kind of making what we call an unstable surface. But if you start off with fluid paints, for example, I'm not having to water down the gunk. Okay, there's plenty of polymers in here. I could still add some water to this. Okay, but if I add some little bits of like GAC 100, or if I want it slow drying, I would use Airbrush Medium. Okay, if I want to make it a slow drying thing. And in the open range, you can buy some open thinners, which are pretty similar to the Airbrush Medium. But I know there's virtually no water in here, apart from a little bit on my brush. There's no water in here, but I've got a watery consistency. Equally, I can add that to a heavy gel or a regular gel or any of the gels and make it thicker. So for my way of working, I like to use the fluids. Then I can choose whether they go thick or whether they go thin, depending on what I mix them with. Okay, so that's pretty much the difference. There are other brands. I don't use the, I'm sure it's lovely, the Atelier brand make an acrylic that you can, these will all dry and you won't get them off. Okay, Atelier make a brand that if you put some medium with it or some fluids with it, you can wake it up again. I haven't tried those, so I can't speak for those. I have no idea what they're like. So there are other brands out there that do other things than the normal acrylic. Okay, equally like with the Golden Open. Equally, I can mix any of these together. All right, so I can mix this fluid, okay, with this. That's no problem at all. It's slightly diluting it in terms of viscosity, but it's certainly not diluting it in terms of pigment load. So any of these guys and any of these guys, you can mix with a regular or a soft gel or a heavy gel, and you are going to extend the thickness of it, but you're certainly going to extend how much you get. And so that's pretty much a good practice if you're trying to. So for example, here I've got some regular gel, and I can mix any of these. Okay, probably I would start off thinking in terms of a 50-50 mix, and this is just a system 3, so it's not, you know, I've got double the amount by mixing it with some regular gel. And bearing in mind a tub of, you know, a 350 ml tub of regular gel is going to be about £12, $15 or something. I can't do the maths of how many tubes of paint that would be, but you can extend it. Okay, that's the point I'm trying to make, is you can really make it go further. So I would say if you're working with acrylics, whether you're working with fluids or with tube paint, always have a tub of a regular gel or a heavy gel or a soft gel, depending on your preference for how thick you want it, and just have that on your palette, and you keep going, and that's going to extend your paints. And then of course your choice is how thick or thin you want them. Okay, so any of these thicker ones could be mixed with something like the GAC 100 to make it thinner. It could be mixed with gloss medium to make it thinner. So this is some, I know it doesn't come like this, but whoa, okay, so I can mix this with this, for example, just because it's nearby. All right, That's going to look, it's made it even looser, but there's no water in there. All right. So that's made a really nice loose puddle. Equally, I could have gone for a heavy gel and made it thicker. I hope that's clear, and that kind of helps you in terms of where you stand or what you want to do in terms of viscosity, what you want to do in terms of saving money, what you want to do in terms of, you know, what if you're starting out, what to buy. What I'm not covering on this particular one is what colors you would use for different things. This is really about viscosity and extending it, so making it thin and making it thick. Now, as I said before, the Airbrush Medium is going to make it slow drying. Equally, you can buy liquid retarders that are going to slow the drying time, or you've got things like Golden Open, which are thick but are slower drying, and you can buy a Golden Open gel that you can mix with any of these to slow the drying time. Because most people say that's what it is about acrylics that really annoys them, is how quickly they dry compared to oils. Okay. Just move this out of the way. Actually, I'll just tear that off. Finally, on this section, we have things called acrylic inks, which are inks that have acrylic polymers in them, which means that when they dry, they are waterproof. They're not going to wash off. You can't wake them up again. Okay, but they can be as thin as a watercolor, and they can flow in the same way, and you can use them in some pens, you can use them in dip pens. They behave like an old-fashioned ink. I use mostly Golden Open, and the Open brand of ink, as I call it, is called High Flow. Okay, so they're called High Flow Acrylics by Golden, and the same thing applies to the tube. You can see on the tube whether or not they're transparent or not. They have the same quality pigments as all the paints have in them, but they have retarders in them that are thin, that slow the drying time. Because obviously if you're using an ink, you don't want to clog your pen. You want it to stay wet for a considerable amount of time. So they're slow drying. By the very nature of them, they're slow drying. But you can still add them to things. Some one or two I have a bit of trouble with, but on the whole you can add these to the gels and paste to tint them. Equally, you can flood your transparent surfaces with them, and I'm going to do that on my large painting. So I tend to get them because I use them a lot. I buy them in these big ones, and again you can probably see better on here that this is transparent red. And they come even bigger than this. The black I buy in a huge one. So this has got the 3 bars on it. It says what it's suitable for pens and brushes, etc., etc. Light, fast, flexible. What you're meant to do with these is shake them. So some people have used them and said, oh, it's really watery, I don't like it. Give it a shake. There's little beads in here, as you can hear. Okay. I wouldn't recommend you shake these guys, maybe sometimes just turn them up to get the pigments going around. If you shake these, you're going to get foam. You don't really want any foam happening. But these guys are designed to be shaken because the pigment load settles to the bottom. And then when you squish it out, okay, that's how thin they are. As I said before, you can use these in pens. Of course, you can use them as brushes, okay. But they're really thin. You can dribble them on your painting. You can still add a little water. The rule I tend to have in my head, although Golden did do some testing and reckon you can do more, but the rule I have in my head is a 30% thing. So you can add 30% of water to any of these products and you're not compromising the binders in them. So you can still get it even looser if you wish to. If you add a lot more water than that, it's not going to be so sticky. Okay, so be careful if you're using that, particularly on a non-absorbent surface. If this is an absorbent surface like watercolor paper or any of the absorbent grounds we've been looking at, or absorbent pastes, then you're fine. There's no limit to how much water you use. It's going to soak in, okay? It doesn't need to have something to hang on to. It's going to soak into an absorbent surface. There are other acrylic inks. I know Winsor & Newton make a range. I quite like these. I don't know if these are acrylic or whether they're shellac based. These are, and I'm sorry about my pronunciation. I've got quite a few things wrong on these courses. I don't know how to say this. Rohres. I'm sure Regina watching this will tell me. So it's Rohres, I don't know. But these are lovely. And again, I've mixed these with, they're beautiful colours. Okay, these are gorgeous. I've mixed these with acrylics. And they're fine. They've been fine. Certainly, if you mix it with, again, a good standby is this GAC 100, because that's a really nice. It's runnier than the gloss medium, but it, you know, you can mix that and we're off. We're good to go. Okay, and they can all be mixed in together. Okay, so you can get your nice flows, your nice mark making with your acrylic based inks. You can, I have done. If you mix the fluids with Airbrush Medium, you can get a kind of ink. The pigment load isn't as strong. Okay, you're kind of diluting the pigment load a little. But if you don't want to, if you've got these, like I said before, you know, my go-to is the fluids. Then I can buy stuff to change them. So I can buy the heavy gels to make them nice and thick, the regular gels to make them like tubes. I can use the GAC 100 to thin them down, and I can mix them with Airbrush Medium to make them almost very similar to an acrylic ink. They behave the same to acrylic ink. The pigment load is a little bit compromised, but on the whole they're fine. Okay, I don't think Golden are calling this Airbrush Medium anymore, because I think that people feel it's only to be used with an airbrush, but actually it's a really useful medium to have, and it's really thin. Okay, I wouldn't mix that with these, because then you've just got too much retarder going on, and you might have a lot of very slow drying inks. You don't want it that slow drying. Hopefully that kind of explains what all these paints do. If you have any questions, then please email me. In this section, I want to talk to you about oil paint. It's a nice alternative to acrylics. It can be used on top of acrylics, but you can never, ever use acrylics on top of a painting that's been painted with oil paint or oil and cold wax medium. And I'll talk to you about both those in a minute. But you can go over an acrylic painting. So, for example, this is the one that I've been working on in Smashing Surfaces. I could now coat that with, this is an acrylic painting, okay? I could coat it with a clear gesso, like this one. There's others on the market. But the clear gesso is going to give me a gritty surface, okay, a rough surface that's clear, that the oil paint can hang on to. Okay, now there's an awful lot of texture in here, so I wouldn't overly worry about it, but you don't want your oil paint sliding around or sliding off. Certainly on areas up the top here where this is a soft gel medium, it's quite shiny, and this is a regular gel medium, you definitely need something gritty on there if you're going to work on this with any oil-based media. Neither can you mix oil paints with any of the acrylic paste and gel. So they're completely separate, but you can have oil on top of acrylic paste and gels. Okay, so this is a naked one on the series of the same thing. I could now coat this with the Liquitex and work into it with oil paint or oil and cold wax medium. They're two different ways of painting, by the way, and I'm going to quickly go through the materials for both. So these are some of the many oil paints that I use. I'm not overly fussy about brands. It's more about whether I like the colours or not, because they all tend to actually be good quality. It's very difficult to get a bad quality oil paint. Because basically an oil paint is mixed with pigments and linseed oil. So unless the pigments are rubbish, there's not an awful lot you can really change. And will be about pigment load and how strong the pigments are that gives the quality. So I've always got a white on the go, a titanium white. There's always some reds. I have a preference for transparent colours where possible. You can always make a transparent opaque by putting an opaque colour with it, but you can't make an opaque colour transparent. And I like doing a lot of glazing and building up layers of glazing, and so the transparency thing is quite important to me, but it's a personal thing. Okay, so these are nicely transparent. This is a Winsor & Newton Indigo that's transparent, Payne's Grey. Some of them are more transparent than others, and they have a symbol on the side here, okay, That tells me this is a circle, a blank circle. That tells me that's transparent. They all have different symbols. This is transparent. It's got an empty square, as has this one. The turquoise shouldn't have, but it's probably got too mucky. This turquoise is not transparent. There, you just about make it out. It's got a solid square. Have I got another Williamsburg? Hold on, here we go. Yeah, right. So the alizarin orange has an empty square. That's transparent. The turquoise has a solid square. That is opaque. You may get one that has a half and half, like across diagonally, which means it's semi-transparent. Okay, but there's a reason why I particularly like the turquoise, the favourite colour of mine. So I've got these, and there are other brands that I like. I particularly like the Rembrandt range from Tellens. They have a lot of transparent colours. I don't have it yet, but Winsor & Newton do a transparent yellow. It's quite hard to get a transparent yellow. Although I think I've got, oh no, I can see over here, I've got Williamsburg transparent yellow, but I haven't tried it yet. Okay, so I'm not going to get that one out. And the Jacksons are very good. I tend to go for Jackson's white. So these are your oil paints. Now, if you just want to use oil paint as it is, okay, you could just squeeze these guys out and you're good to go. Okay, you don't have to add anything to them at all. Okay, you can just paint with them as they are. All right, you can mix them together, obviously. So this is a lovely transparent green gold, but at the point I start putting some white in, and actually it's always best to mix with a palette knife. Then you don't end up with really gunky brushes. There we are. Okay, it's always easier to clean a palette knife than it is a brush, right? So that's made that beautiful green gold. Look at that colour. That's made that opaque. Okay, and I could just carry on painting with that as long as I wanted to. Okay, keep going on that one. If I want it thinner, I could add a medium. I tend to like Galkid medium, but you could use Liquin medium. That would be fine. You could add linseed oil to make it thinner and more viscous. So then that's pretty much it. Now there are a few rules, or a couple of rules with oil paint, the whole fat over lean rule, that you shouldn't really put a thick coat on top of a thin glaze. But other than that, I think just play with it. It is delicious. The downside is it does take a long time to dry, which means unless you stick to a quite limited palette, by that I mean maybe some blues and greens, all right, or some reds and blues into purples, that kind of idea. Okay, a limited palette, a section of the color wheel. If I then added in the green to this, at some point I'm going to end up with a mud color because I'm mixing all three primary colors together. Okay, so a limited palette, and you don't mind the time it takes to dry. Adding Galkid will speed the drying time up. Okay, and there are other mediums that will speed the drying time up. I would suggest you keep to a similar consistency for everything, then you avoid all those fat over lean rules. Doesn't stop you doing a bit of glazing when it's all dried off. So that's pretty much oil paint, really, and it's lovely because it does flow. Unlike acrylic, you can blend it, you can work on it for hours, you can keep going back to it. Okay, so that's pretty much oil paint. There's plenty of YouTube videos online about color mixing and oil paint and everything else. My way of working with oils is to mix it with a medium called cold wax medium. Okay, I really like this. And so the bit I've got here, I get that off that brush. Incidentally, if you didn't know, you should, if you're working with both acrylics and oil-based media, don't use the same brushes. Okay, there's all sorts of, they'll ruin your brushes and you won't get the best out of them. So make sure you have brushes that are for oil paints and brushes that are for acrylics, and they don't mix up together. It's just good practice. Right, so this is some cold wax medium. This is a gambling brand. There's 3 or 4 on the market. And as hopefully you can see this oil paint. I'm not quite sure whether you can. It's quite shiny. Okay, I could get some more out. I'm being ever so mean. Let's get some more out. I'll use the rest of that. Oh, here we go. Okay, it's shiny. Okay, it's oily. It's shiny. At the point you mix it, and the recommended ratio is 50-50. At the point you mix it with cold wax, that's matte now. Okay, and it's become a kind of pasty consistency. It's become a kind of peanut buttery consistency. Okay, so that's pretty much how that works. If I wanted to make that more viscous, I could add some Galkid. Okay, or I could add some Gamsol, which is Gamblin's odorless mineral spirit, okay, or a mixture of the two. So there's a mix called 50-50. Now I've done 5 videos on oil and cold wax painting, so I'm not gonna repeat myself. This is really just so that you get the idea of the kind of paints you can use on top of your acrylic pastes and gels panels. Okay, to clean up, I like this one. This is the Bob Ross odorless thinner. Obviously I get most of it off with baby oil or vegetable oil, but the final clean, this is good, mainly because it's quite cheap. They sell that in London and Jackson's. So that's pretty much it in terms of oil paint. It can go thinner, and I'll show you how you can get it thinner. Once you've opened a jar of the medium, whether it's this one or liquid, make sure you store it upside down, because it will begin to dry at the top. Okay, here the top layer of it will begin to dry, and if you do it that way, you won't be able to get the rest out. So that's going to loosen it. Look, see, that's much softer. Oh, gorgeous, lovely color. Not quite sure what I'm going to do with that now. I'm going to go back to some painting. So that's it. So you've got oil paint that you can mix with linseed oil, with Gamsol, with Galkid, or you can mix them. This is a medium, cold wax medium. You can mix that with any of the paints. This will then dry quicker. Okay, much quicker, not quickly, but it will dry overnight rather than weeks for oil paint by adding the cold wax medium. Okay, I think I've covered it all. Oh, and also with the cold wax medium process, you don't have the fat over lean. You can put glazes on top of thick, on top of thing. As long as every layer has some cold wax medium in it, then you can play around as much as you like. Okay, that's oil paint. Okay, I think we pretty much covered it.